Good morning, my friends. Paul here coming at you with a crypto coffee update where we talk about all of the news, events, and happenings in the exciting world of decentralized finance. And for the namesake of the series, you know I have my delicious cup of coffee, so join me for what we call our simultaneous sip of solidarity to start the day off right. Cheers. Fantastic. All right. Another great way to start the day, a sea of green in the crypto markets. As you can see here, Bitcoin has broken above 5,500 and allegedly shows no signs of stopping. I don't have any information to corroborate that per se, but it's definitely been exciting to see this move upward. And actually, we're sitting around 5,600 now. So really just $100 clips here and there as we move upward in the crypto markets. And of course, looking at crypto Twitter, a lot of the volatility in people's moods has resurfaced as well, as seems to be the precedent whenever prices start to move quickly up or down. There's a lot of emotions in the mix, and it's interesting to see. It makes for a good show and makes for great learning. A lot of opinions from some really intelligent people being thrown back and forth in the fray. I call them diamonds in the rough because certainly if you can voice your opinion on this platform openly, it tends towards the tragedy of the commons, I suppose you could say. Now that we got the price action stuff out of the way, let's get into the actual news and developments that have broken in the last couple days. JP Morgan, they're expanding their blockchain use into payments. Keeping in mind, JP Morgan launched the JPM coin just a few months ago as a kind of beta test to experiment with their known partners as to see what applications or not blockchain may have for their firm. They transfer about $6 trillion in assets daily, so if they can get some incremental improvements, that would make them very happy, no doubt. So you can see here from John Hunter, the head of global clearing over at JP Morgan, the initial use case was around sanction screening. Now they're looking into the ability to do more at point of settlement, and here's the part that really blew me away, guys. Banks straight through processing rates are in the mid 80s to mid 90s. That made sense. That's something we're all probably familiar with, some of the outdated tech that banks ultimately use, but it's that gap, that 5 to 20% of payments that have to be assessed by operations, where we're trying to alleviate some of that pain. So 5 to 20% of total payments need to be looked at by operations. Assumingly this is either a manual process, but even if it's not, even if it's a higher level automated process, that still takes time, money, and of course salary. So this is something that can really revolutionize how banks currently process payments, at no small part at the behest of this emerging technology. So very interesting things to see and very exciting and potentially bullish for blockchain and Bitcoin as a whole. So, moving on, we have Utah closing one of the biggest loopholes for digital privacy, something that is very worrisome and a precedent that, honestly, I was not familiar with in this context. So seeing that this loophole has been partially closed gives me a sigh of relief. Pardon me. All right, so jumping into that, a precedent known as the third-party doctrine has since the 1970s allowed the government to ascertain information about you without a warrant if you should divulge this information to a third party. The Supreme Court's logic in establishing the doctrine was that the individuals have forfeited their expectation of privacy by giving information about their behavior to a third party. This is a worrisome precedent, especially as we sail into the neon future where information is in digital format everywhere. At what point can one assume reasonably that they've given up their expectation for privacy? If I talk to my doctor about a medical issue, does that mean that I have given up my reasonable expectation for privacy despite HIPAA laws being in place? What if I'm under the covers talking to my wife about just anything and Alexa happens to pick up what we're talking about? Is that admissible? Not that I own an Alexa, I value my privacy, as I hope you do as well. But suffice to say, does that mean that evidence is now up for grabs for the government? It's very worrisome and very excited to see HB 57 closing down that loophole. As Jay-Z once put it, my glove compartment is locked and so is the trunk in the back. I know my rights, so you're gonna need a warrant for that. It's a pretty humorous quote there, but Mr. Z, I don't believe that that's the case if your glove compartment is considered a third party. Dang, hate how that works, but unless you're in Utah. All right, so exciting things moving along for privacy. Let's take a look at some developments in commerce. Rakuten, the Japanese version of Amazon, has been expanding like mad. I'm not a huge fan of how You Today lays out their articles. That's not the fault of Yuri here. He did a great job writing this up. You can see Rakuten has been jumping into online banking services, e-commerce, media, all kinds of things. Definitely trying to pull an Amazon in terms of expanding with many tentacles into various industries. And Forbes believes that when Rakuten adopts crypto completely, it'll cause the next Bitcoin bull run. So that could be interesting. Who knows what the catalyst for the overall next bull run will be, but suffice to say, a lot of people are waiting for it. One thing that may help is the ability to use Bitcoin on Amazon. This is something that has a lot of people extremely excited, but keep in mind, Amazon itself never actually sees the Bitcoin. Excuse me, I'm becoming an old man. Amazon itself never sees the Bitcoin and doesn't have to agree to the process. So this may pose some issue down the road, potentially, if Amazon catches wind of this Moon app that does indeed use the Lightning Network and pulls the plug on it. Goodness. Oh no. All right, there we go. So now my throat is clear. Amazon may well pull the plug on this if they get word, but so far this is just breaking. So no one's really sure exactly how this will pan out, but it does attest to the fact that the Lightning Network is indeed expanding. This is something I've been bearish on personally. I view the Lightning Network as a bit of an overcomplication in terms of payment settlement. But nonetheless, a lot of people are lauding it as the layer 2 solution of the future. So with enough resources and enough time and enough applications such as this, perhaps ultimately my perspective could be turned on its head. Always open to new information, and perhaps the Lightning Network will indeed be followed by a crack of thunder of adoption. Time will tell. Now, one thing that has not been going very well in the crypto community is Bitcoin SV. Craig Wright, the alleged Satoshi and billionaire Calvin Ayre's pet project. They have been trying to sue individuals who claim that Craig Wright is not Satoshi over Twitter. So a pseudo-anonymous individual named Hodlnaut, if you remember from our last Crypto Coffee video, was contacted by Craig Wright and essentially said, "We want to see you in court because you said I'm not Satoshi." And it kind of developed from there. There's a legal fund going on to support this individual, but we're not talking about the off-chain issues. It turns out there's some on-chain issues as well for Bitcoin SV. And it's possibly due to the unwieldy block size, the multi-terabyte blocks that Craig and his, I guess you could say, individuals that associate with him are so excited about. It actually leads to a lot of issues with how this kind of information is propagated. You can see here from BitMEX directly a chart showing the chain reorganization. Now, a chain reorganization is essentially when you have two chains that are deemed valid and are competing to become the legitimate chain. In Bitcoin, we have what's known as the longest chain rule. So let's say we have two competing chains and chain A happens to solve a block before chain B. Well, chain A now becomes the valid chain, and chain B, those transactions are deemed invalid. So you can perhaps see how this is something we don't want to happen in a blockchain, since it could invalidate some payments if they just happen to inadvertently be on a side of history that becomes invalid. That would not be very beneficial. This is partially due to Nielsen's law of internet bandwidth. I've heard some individuals claim this is due to Moore's law, but these are connected but very different concepts. Nielsen's law, as said, deals specifically with internet bandwidth, and it says that a high-end user's connection speed grows by 50% per year. And this has been plotted since 1983 and has been very consistent with the trend line. So you can see that this attests to how information is sent over a network, what is known as bandwidth. So with very large blocks, extremely large, terabyte size, you can see here, due to the flagrant lack of use, blocks only get up to about 50, 70 megabytes or so. Here's another 100 megabyte block, 128 megabytes. So that's pretty impressive. But obviously it leads to some issues, and that is, as said, directly related to this. If you have a huge chunk of information in a block and you need to send that over the network, the larger the block, the longer it will take to propagate that information across the network, which means a higher probability of two chains, not the wrapper, working at the same time that are deemed as valid. Moore's law, just for the sake of context, doesn't actually deal with the network propagation. It deals specifically with the number of transistors on integrated circuit chips, and that goes from 1971 all the way up to today. So while these chips are getting more efficient, ultimately that doesn't say too much. It says a little bit, but not too much about how information is propagated over the network. So Nielsen's law is a bit different than Moore's law, and and has an explicit effect here on how information is sent and propagated in a blockchain network. So very interesting things there. I guess I could say best of luck to Bitcoin SV, but that's not really the sentiment they've put out to the wider crypto community. So in the true SV spirit, you lazy guys, what are you doing? Get to work. This never should have happened. I can't believe your incompetence. It doesn't sound right to say. That's not the kind of person I am, but it seems that's what Craig would want. So in the spirit of fake Toshi, that's how we're going to treat the SV folk. Moving right along, guys. Blockchain patent has been granted to a subsidiary of Raytheon. For those of you who are not familiar with Raytheon, it is a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor here in the United States. They build all of the terrible tools used for warfare all around by all of the loving governments that want to hug you with their arms. And I'm not talking about the arms with hands, I'm talking about the arms that go boom. So these guys have gotten a blockchain patent, and a quote, in certain embodiments, the association of the in certain embodiments, the association of the additional context may be accomplished via a blockchain block within a user behavior profile blockchain, implemented with appropriate timestamping to allow for versioning over time. Specifically, this deals with individual action and ascertaining whether or not an individual is known good, anomalous, or malevolent, and their actions to enhance the system's cybersecurity. So really, this has a lot to do with cybersecurity and something that's incredibly important, even though I do not agree with the massive manufacturing and corporatization of arms on the part of the state. It's definitely good to have those things secure, since arguably the state will keep these kind of things more conservative than, say, a terrorist organization. Considering there was a GAO audit recently of the Department of Defense just last summer that showed that there was flagrant security issues from internal metrics. Basically, if you're inside the DoD, then you could cause a lot of trouble, and you need some kind of hierarchy to ensure if an individual user is malevolent. So this is a mixed bag of positive and negative for certain, and as I said before, only time will tell how these kind of things ultimately are applied. So very interesting and something worth keeping an eye on, I think. All right, CZ, the head of Binance, says that Binance Chain does not directly challenge Ethereum. Got to give a shout out to Siamak. I hope I'm saying your name right, man. He's a veteran writer over here at Crypto Globe, and he does a good job. He had a fantastic write-up here, breaks down exactly what CZ is saying about Binance Chain and illuminates basically what it is. So as a public blockchain, Binance Chain will mainly focus on the transfer and trading of blockchain assets, as well as provide new possibilities for the future flow of blockchain assets. So that makes sense. And Binance Coin, the BNB token, will be upgraded to exist on its own blockchain mainnet, becoming a native coin. So rather than being an ERC20 asset, it seems as though Binance is building their own blockchain and migrating the BNB token over. Important notes: no custody of funds, traders maintain control of their private keys, high performance, low latency, high throughput for large user bases, low cost in both fees and liquidity, easy user experience, as friendly as Binance.com, hopefully easier to use than it is to say, at least for me, and a fair trading, minimizing front running to the extent possible. One has to wonder to what extent this will be enforceable, considering a lot of the token sales that have occurred on Binance have sold out in a matter of seconds, whereas the exchange claims it happened in a matter of minutes. So a lot of discrepancies between users who wish to participate and the claims that are being made by the exchange itself. So that's neither here nor there, at least for this subject. If you're wondering what you can do, here's the answer for Binance Chain. Send and receive BNB. You can issue new tokens, which I find quite interesting. Send, receive, burn, mint, freeze, and unfreeze tokens. Now, what I found strange about the fact that you can issue new tokens is the fact that CZ claims that it doesn't even have smart contracts. So I'm curious as to how these tokens will be issued. It'll be exciting to get some more information about that. But CZ wants to be very clear that the Binance DEX does not challenge Ethereum, and frankly, I wouldn't say that it's even a DEX per se, considering decentralized exchange means that it is indeed that, decentralized, even though in the guidance of Angelo Walsh, it is a bit of a loaded term to say decentralized, but nonetheless, if it's controlled by one company, I think we could all agree that's certainly not decentralized in any capacity. But the big takeaway is it doesn't challenge Ethereum, and human. Rather, they want to challenge ourselves, the exchanges. As said, less decentralized. They have a different consensus algorithm as well. They're using Tendermint's consensus algorithm, which is very different from the proof of work consensus algorithm. No support for smart contracts, so they're not actually doing smart contracts as said. And just to back up for a second, proof of work really isn't a consensus algorithm proper. It's a Cybele defense mechanism, so I'd love to hear some more information about that. I'm learning more and more about these subtle nuances that I'm familiar with, but once you get down into the weeds of it, there is a lot of differentiation between each of these protocols and how they interact on a network. So fascinating stuff. Well, enough about that. Let's move on to something we talked about last time. We talked about the fact that one of 3 countries, Central Bank of Afghanistan, they want to issue Bitcoin bonds. This is along with Tunisia and there's another one, I think it was Tajikistan. But suffice to say, this is what they want to do. They want to peg it to Bitcoin specifically. But interestingly enough, they also say that somewhere in here they mention Hyperledger. So it's opaque at the moment. Here it is. Bitcoin and blockchain Hyperledger technology offers central banks an efficient tool to combat money laundering, manage remittances, fight cross-border terrorism, and limit gray economies. This is something that's arguably concerning, considering that, well, the authority of the state is far-reaching, and ultimately it seems as though they want to skim some capital off of the individuals that inhabit the land. And given the fact that governments around the world have not been very good managers of the capital that they are in control of, one has to wonder to what degree this may negatively impact the general populace at the benefit of the state. But nonetheless, it's interesting to see Afghanistan, along with Russia and a number of other nations, have far less government debt as percentage of GDP when compared to Western nations, such as Italy specifically, and the United States. So perhaps this may be ultimately a good mechanism to allow these impoverished nations to bootstrap themselves up into a more modern economy, but only time will tell with that as well. One thing's for sure, Bitcoin so far is one of the best performing assets of 2019. Definitely a reprise from the frigid winter of 2018's bear market that we've seen. And this is coming out of Crypto Slate. They've done a great job thus far with their outlet, and I think that's a great note to end on. One of the best performing assets of 2019 thus far. Saw a tweet this morning when I was browsing Twitter, eating my breakfast. I saw that from 2017 to 2019, Bitcoin is still up 400 and some odd %, making it definitely one of the best performing assets over the last 2 years. That was a tweet from Anthony Pompliano, definitely worth a follow on Twitter. So with that said, guys, I believe that is all of the tantalizing tidbits to come out of the crypto space in the last short while. Always a pleasure to sit down with you all, cover this information, keep you up to date, and share knowledge, because after all, sharing is caring, and if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, we go together. So with that said, thanks so much for taking the time and sitting down with me, enjoying a fresh cup of coffee. But for now, I'm Paul, signing off. We are Cryptide, and remember, the tide is rising, as is the price of Bitcoin, guys. Woo!